Hey everybody, thanks for joining me on another Human Side interview. Special guest today, Mr. Chris Brogan. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thrilled to be here, Mitch. Thanks for having me on.
Long time no see. I think the last time I spoke with you, I had a big spoonful of oatmeal in my mouth.
Oatmeal Jackson, that's what we call you.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, I've been called a lot worse, so I'll take it. Hey, everyone, thanks for joining us today on Human Social's Human Side interviews. And today we have Mr. Chris Brogan. I had a chance to first meet Chris a couple of years ago. Our relationship has blossomed over the last couple of years, and it's been a real pleasure, Chris, to get to know you. For those of you that don't know Chris, let me just give you the very short intro. There's a lot to know about Chris Brogan at chrisbrogan.com. But Chris is the world's leading authority on owning the game you most want to win. He's the CEO of Owner Media Group and a sought-after public speaker, a New York Times best-selling author, and an author of 8 books with more on the way. In a recent blog post, Chris, you stated that you're not a social media expert, and that's going to surprise a lot of people because a lot of people look at you with 300,000 Twitter followers, with Google Plus followers, Facebook, and everything else as being a social media guy, and I know you do embrace the platforms, but instead you categorize yourself as a business advisor and educator. You indicate that you don't care what type of typewriter Hemingway used. What you do care about is how he made us feel. And I think that's fascinating. That's one reason we connected, is we both appreciate the human side to business, the human side to life. And Chris, thanks for being on the show today.
Mitch, my pleasure. Just a point of clarity about that. The reason I don't call myself a social media guy is, to me, it would be like calling myself a telephone guy. If I'm a good salesman, then who cares if I used the phone or if I knocked on the door? Now, someone might say, well, what methods are you best at? Someone might say I'm a great direct mail seller, but I'm not a good face-to-face. But I'm a business strategist. So what I usually do is with individuals or with big companies, I help them figure out which tools to use. I just happen to believe that all these new digital tools are, kind of the most magical thing out there.
They're another way to communicate. When people talk about ROI and things like that, I always respond with, what is the value of being able to communicate? And that's what social media and these digital tools allow us to do, is simply communicate a different way, a new way, a way that's good for you, Chris. What are you comfortable? How are you comfortable communicating? And that's the way I want to reach out and touch you. Chris, what first got you involved with focusing on the human side of business, focusing on the more intimate part of forming relationships in the business world, as opposed to the social media bells and whistles themselves?
So years and years ago, the illustrious Tom Peters, in the midst of writing a whole bunch of really great books like In Search of Excellence and all that, wrote an article, I think, for Fast Company called The Brand Called You. And in that, he started hooking my attention about, that you should be the CEO of your cubicle if you work at your office or whatever. And I said, I love this idea. So I read everything he did. And I read all kinds of other great people's work. And I just kept thinking, you got to understand, this is probably mid-90s at this point that I'm reading all that, or mid-90s. I started thinking, man, business seems so sterile. At that time, especially having gone through the 80s, business was very much about we language. It was all about how many cubicles could we put into a building. It was all like, it was taking the industrial age to its logical conclusion, which was make people into cogs. And I just started thinking, man, I would really love it if people would treat my mom better. I would love it if that, when I called customer service, I felt satisfied and not angry. And I thought, maybe there's some way to do this. And as things were progressing, as business was progressing, as I was in the belly of some pretty big companies, I worked for Ma Bell, the phone company back in the old days, and then a wireless company that served all the big companies. I kept thinking, there's got to be a way that we could just be us, and we could really connect with people about what we're interested in, and really just aggregate the value inside of all the people inside an organization. And that's where I started, getting the seeds of that, Mitch. And so I'd say that I've expressed that in lots of different ways, most often in sales and marketing and whatnot. But I've just, if you really bottom line everything that I believe, I think we all really want to be treated like we belong somewhere, not that we have to fit in. And I think we like to believe that, if there's a better way to contribute, that there's a lot of good feeling in that sense of that we're all sort of contributing in the same direction.
We have similar experiences because when I was a law clerk clerking for large law firms, there was a hierarchy with senior partners actually coming across as being too good to speak to a new client until that client, frankly, proved themselves as being worthy of the law firm. And not being raised in the profession, I noticed there was a big need to humanize the relationship between the lawyer and the client. And for the past 30 years, that's what I've been trying to do, is really make it a more comfortable relationship and a give and take and adding value. And it's interesting how digital, the internet, and social has allowed me to really do that. With you, looking back in time to the early to mid 90s, Chris, if the internet hadn't come along, if social hadn't come along, do you think you still would have pursued this passion or this interest? And if so, how would you have connected with so many people? What would you have done differently, if anything?
That's the first time I've been asked that question. I like that. The answer is that I was trying to connect with people. I was writing, stories and fiction. I was writing all kinds of things and trying to connect as being a writer. But that meant that newspapers and magazines and book publishers had to say, yes, Chris, you can have a voice. We think you're worthy. And way back then, I had no idea what that took and what mattered, what didn't. And I can tell you that the majority of people that write and publish books have no idea either, because once you start writing a book and thinking that the book is going to be sold on the merits of its ideas, you're already wrong. It's how many books can you move. That is the publishing business. It's can you sell a lot of books. That's why it's called the New York Times bestseller list, not the New York Times best writer list. The week that Julian Smith and I made it, I was shocked as anybody. I had that Groucho Marx quote running through my head saying, never belong to a club that will have you. And I thought, man, that wasn't that hard to be a New York Times bestseller. Psh, I did it, first book, right? And then never did it since. So I was clearly, lucky. But I'll tell you that the whole experience of trying to communicate back then, I was communicating back in the prototypical internet. I was back when there was bulletin board services, I was doing dial-up to other people's houses. And, if you ever see Twitter complain about something like the Grammys, you get to watch this stream of hashtags go by and people, kind of real-time talking. Well, imagine that one phone call at a time. So I'd have to dial the guy's house, wait for my modem to talk to his modem, wait for his software to see that I was there, type a few commands, go to the forum, and say, I hated that show. And then hang up so someone else could say, I love that show, you're stupid. It would take like a year to complain about a TV show.
I didn't know it was a one-on-one type of situation with the bulletin boards back then.
It was terrible. And, I remember when AOL came out, that this was the most revolutionary thing in the world. That's why, if you look at, commercials from the 80s, you'd see AOL keynote, Coca-Cola, keyword, sorry, because it used to be like, whoa, how can we actually find something? And then when the real internet came, when the training wheels came off and AOL was suddenly a novelty, it was, like the kid with the car seat and the steering wheel in the back of the car, you suddenly went, wow, and, all kinds of craziness ensued. So the first, decade or more of publicly available internet, the 90s to early 2000s, everyone was mind blown anyway. And you were kind of like one or two categories. You were crazy and you bought a website before you knew what it was supposed to be, or you were like most people and you were just like, and you just kind of bounced around all over the internet. And I was more like that latter group. And when I finally found the magic in that old silk hat, what's great about the most recent years is that the tech and the tools and everything has just been so much easier to use, and life is getting better.
It's made access to the digital platforms a lot easier for everyone. You don't need to be a coder to put together your first website. My first website, Chris, was in 1996. I used the Wayback Machine website to check it out. It was a 4 or 5 page front page website. Probably took me 2 weeks to put together because, learning how to upload, doing the FTP and everything else, it just was not that simple. But, today anybody can go online. It's just a matter of doing it the right way and sharing your own personal message. Let's go back in time real quick, because looking in your background, I see, let me bring this up real quick. There you are. I see Batman. I see another little guy behind you. And there's a story there, Chris. There's a story about superheroes and underwear and being a proud freak. And a lot of people relate to your story and your blog post and your videos and things like that, which incorporate your background. Tell us a little bit about that. What first got you interested in comic books, superheroes, writing fiction, writing books, and things like that? What early influences in your life gave you that connection?
This is what makes this a Mitch Jackson show. This is what makes me all excited. This is why I love being with you.
Good.
The answer is I was 5 years old. My grandfather was a candy salesman. Like, talk about the most awesome job in the world. He sold candy. So he drove around to places and shot the baloney with some really nice old people, and they sold candy and different types of candy. And what kid didn't want to hang out with my grandfather? So he would take me around on his he probably didn't even want to, but he would take me around on his route, and he would buy me comic books back when that was not an investment. And I started reading comic books very young age. And, you know, just like any kid, you start with Archie and you start with the Disney ones, and then you first see two guys in tights punching each other, and you go, whoa, there's blood on that guy's lip. This is the real thing.
I remember that.
So that moment, you know, it was just so indelibly burned into me. And so I grew up around superheroes, and there were always the same fights, Marvel versus DC, who could beat who in a fight. But I always latched on to, I loved all of the superheroes, but I latched on to Batman for some strange reasons. And one was just that he was just a regular guy surrounded by people with superpowers. And this is like the kernel of Chris Brogan right here. It is that you are the superhero that you were waiting for, but you have to create that superhero. You have to actually do the work to be that salvation. Otherwise, there is no radioactive spider in your future. There is no planet blowing up and to give you your powers. You got to do it yourself.
I still remember, Chris, with traveling with my family from Tucson, Arizona, where I was brought up, to Laguna Beach, California, which I live pretty close to now. But I still remember, I don't remember too much about that trip, but I remember my mom bringing back to the hotel room my first Batman comic book and a Spider-Man comic book. And I remember feeling the same way. I mean, that's what I remember about our week in Southern California. It was the comic books. And
not the weather, none of that.
That really didn't matter. And so in a way, I can relate to where you were coming from. Now, if you don't mind, because I've connected with your mom on Facebook, and she's been very nice, commenting and interacting with me every now and then, and I follow your dad on Twitter. Can you share with our viewers a little bit about growing up in the Brogan household, what influences your mom and dad had? And I know your dad's I think he's a poker dealer in Vegas. And
that's right.
And did you grow up playing poker?
Heck no. Well, yes, but I'll get you there. So my mom and dad met. They were DJs. They were radio DJs. And my mom was the nighttime sultry request line woman with the soft velvety voice, and my dad was the morning news show nerd. In the 60s, he had the shaved crew cutty kind of hair. He was the opposite of a hippie. He bet wrong on every single band that ever could have, like he thought the Ventures were going to far outdo the Beatles, et cetera, et cetera. And that gives you him in a nutshell. My mom was a lot more go with the flow. She ended up getting a lot of firsts. She was like the first female drafts person in Maine, and she was one of the first people in pole climbing school as a woman at the phone company, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh my God.
Very
Wow.
creative, very interesting people. They very much filled me both with the sense that, hard work is important. Like my dad worked 4 jobs when I was a kid, and that really stuck to me. Also my mom. And the other part of that, so really hard work, be creative. You don't have to take anything for granted. My mom stood up for me with teachers starting around grade 5 when I started becoming trouble with teachers. And I remember just so vividly, I'd come out of a meeting with this teacher, and I was pretty adamant about my point, and my mom had really taken my side on this. And as we're walking out, my mom just under her breath goes, "That woman's such a bitch." And I said, "Oh, my mom just swore about a teacher." Wow! Like, it was like the power exchange of that moment was huge to me. Like, authority. We've just yelled at authority.
And that's where it all started.
Those are the influences right there. So, my parents I spent all my high school with all my friends in the basement. Like, we all hung out and played games down there and stuff together. My mom was cook for everybody. Even when we didn't have hardly any money, we'd just stretch it enough to everybody to go out to Chinese food or something like that, or everybody come over and she would learn how to try to make pita chips. So it was a great upbringing, and I was invited to family poker one time a million years ago, and in family poker there's like 20 or so people, and they'd play every week, and it was nickel bets, and I remember going and someone staked me the 50 cents to buy in or whatever, and I made about $11. Again, a nickel at a time, so that's pretty good haul, right? I made 11, and then I said, this is boring, I think I'm going to go back and watch TV. And everyone was so mad because they wanted a chance to get their money back out of me. And I never played again because, one, they were mad at me for that, and two, because evidently I was a shark or something.
Well, the key is, as your dad would probably tell you, the key is to learn when to walk away. That's
My dad and Kenny Rogers.
And Kenny Rogers, but I'm sure Kenny got it from your dad. But, I grew up at the ranch I grew up on. We had a 6 o'clock cocktail hour, and then after dinner, all the guests would sit around, and we had a poker table, big poker table, probably a Vegas type of table. And I remember watching my dad one night on a big bet actually win a $2,000 saddle, where the guest who's paying to stay at our ranch wanted to go all in and didn't have the cash with him, so he goes out to the tack house and comes back with this custom-made saddle, puts it on the center of the poker table, and what he didn't know is my dad had like a full house or something, and I just remember feeling really bad for our guests. I'm like, here's some guy from the East Coast paying to be a cowboy at our ranch, a lot of money, and he's leaving without a saddle. And my dad said, that's the world of gambling. Either you win or you lose, and if you win, you take your winnings and you shake the man's hand and you throw that saddle over a horse and call it a day, But I can relate to your dad because I used to work for Caesars Tahoe right out of college. I spent a couple of years in the casino business, and I notice he still tweets out different poker specials, different games that are coming up. Is that something that you taught him how to do, or did he pick that up on his own?
My parents are really the most savvy people in the universe, and my dad is the social media guy for a bunch of different online poker companies that operate out of Nevada. So he runs social media for, I forget which ones though, Pocket Fives, I think, WSOP.com. It changes a little bit from time to time, and so he does that. And he was an IT guy before this. He was building servers and stuff like that for a very long time, doing very high-end technology stuff. And my mom worked for the phone company in force management and resource planning and that sort of thing. So they're both pretty technical people. And again, as DJs and technical people, you can start to see my media making background just being laid out in front of you. So I have all of their DNA, all the good and all the bad, so I'm very lucky that way. And they're they live out in Las Vegas. They don't have official day jobs anymore. They make some of their income from things like that. They write a blog together called mompoppow.com. And I helped them a little with blogging, and my mom sits in on like all my webinars and all my courses and all that. It's in Rob Hatch's things to do. It's like, put up the sales letter, do this, register Chris's mom. Really? And so it gets done. And what's great about it is that, she'll give me good feedback. She'll usually tell me that, I have to slow down my talking or talk louder or something like that. So that's always good too. So it works fine.
Well, when talking about your webinars and talking about your digital projects and all the things that you're doing, I noticed this afternoon, I was just clicking around, you've got a webinar jumpstart coming up, I think, this evening, your time. Tell us a little bit about, Chris, let's fast forward back to today, back to 2015. What are some of the things that you're doing today that you might suggest your clients or companies that you're consulting incorporate into their everyday business habits with respect to selling product, with respect to expanding their sphere of influence, with respect to developing a certain reputation that they're looking to develop? Webinars. I noticed you're increasing your webinar activity. What's that all about?
So what I work on now with either large companies or just individual performers is the ownership principles, what it means to be an owner. And for that, I have three basic, deep level connections. One is mission, one is communications that lead to connections, and then the other is action, or action and execution. So in the concept of communications, one of the things I'm trying to do is explain to people there's lots of ways to make business happen, and there's lots of ways to deliver value. So as my company happens to be an education and media type company, one of those ways is to give webinars. And the way we do webinars is that we actually charge for them. So I have podcasts, I have video, I have all kinds of stuff that's free, but I charge at a webinar because I'm going to allow for a lot deeper level of value in there. It's not necessarily ever going to be just an interview. It will always have real actionable takeaways. And not that people can't glean information from an interview, but there's a big difference in our mindset when we're sitting there with a notepad and trying to, now do this and then do that. So the webinar jumpstart idea, it's a mini course, so it's in between a webinar and a course. My courses usually run anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. People were saying, boy, that's a lot of time to commit. I really wish there was some way I could kind of get it a little faster. And I said, well, if I give you all that information in text really fast, I can promise you will not read it. There's whole libraries full of wisdom that nobody read. So let me try this method. I'll make a mini course. And the mini course is essentially 1 hour. Then there's an hour break where you could do homework for this course and then come back. And then there's another hour. And the way I put it is content in the first hour, meaning the content of what you're going to deliver in this process, and then the technology. Because I find that a lot of people either get stuck on one side or the other. So the one side they feel comfortable about, it'll be review. The other side that they're not so comfortable about, the notepads will really move. So that's how I put it together. And like our webinars, we priced our webinars so that people purchase them. It's again because one, I deliver more value than your typical product, and two, it's because my intention is that if you pay, you're going to do something better with it. You're going to respect it a bit more if you pay to be there.
Oh, I agree 100%. It's especially with lawyers giving out advice. If you have a client that's paying to retain you for legal help, that client's going to be much more diligent and follow up on what you tell him or her to do, as opposed to giving out free advice. The other thing is, I think, what's your feedback been so far on this new webinar series? Has it been pretty good feedback?
Yeah, it's really good. It's funny. I think our minds are wired to say, let's talk about the negatives first, because I was going to say 98% of people said really great stuff, and the 2% who don't like what I do, it's because they keep saying to me, I expect much more advanced, information, and I keep saying there is no advanced information. It's the basics that are going to get you there. And the people, when they say advanced, it's usually code word for sort of a mechanical trick that will trick something into being.
They want a secret.
Yeah.
They want a secret sauce. Yeah.
They're saying if you use like a question mark $ open parenthesis, then you'll get 10 million more Twitter followers. And I'm like, yep, you could absolutely do that. And everything I do is fairly organic. There's leverage points, of course. And so what I'm usually trying to show people is, here's the basic, here's what you got to do every day to get there. Here's the leverage point where you can maybe get a slightly better result than other people. Here's some actions to take to make that true. So the feedback has been really positive. Really, my favorite thing to say, so for the webinars, for instance, the Jumpstart is a mini course. It's $97. The webinars are $20. What I find really fascinating is I always tell people I'm going to give you at least 6 times that value. So you should be thinking in your head, I would have paid $120 to get here. And almost every single time we do that, we get a mountain of people who write back very specifically, I feel like I should have paid more for this. And that makes me feel good, because I think anytime we can deliver more value than someone pays, it leaves the balance that's still left between those two numbers is what people consider goodwill and hubris. And that's what I think is a really nice byproduct of making good value.
I've attended, I think, 2 of your webinars. I really enjoy them. I've also enjoyed watching you throughout the years tweak and mold and change and modify some of the approaches and some of the things that you've been doing. And I think that's really, really smart. We've done the same thing. Obviously, you're not watching the things that I'm doing, but I look back over the last 10, 12, 15 years, both in the law and on digital, and we've done complete 180-degree changes in how we've approached things. A lot of mistakes I made early I'm trying to avoid now. Yesterday, Chris, and there's a point to what I'm saying. Yesterday, I was on with Shama Hyder, and we were talking about young entrepreneurs shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes, shouldn't be afraid to turn around and come back down the path and go a different direction. And it's a certain mindset, and it's a mindset that I've seen you not be afraid to publicly say, listen, I'm not going to do this anymore. Instead, we're going to go this direction. What are your thoughts? What can you share with our younger business owners, our young entrepreneurs that haven't gotten that yet or haven't figured it out with respect to, tweaking, admitting that you've made a mistake or going a different direction. How important is that in business and frankly in life?
First, I would like to say that I don't think it's something specific to younger people. I have
Good point.
Dozens of emails from people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s every single week who say to me, I don't know who I want to be when I grow up. And a week or so ago, I had a thing on my newsletter about people you should know, and I mentioned Cara Lumen, who is in her 80s, and I got a flood of emails from people saying, oh my gosh, I'm 61 and I felt like I should give up, and here's this woman in her 80s still just flourishing, and you've really told me get back on the path. I keep thinking, 61? You can't surrender then. So, I said to Cara when she was feeling down a long time ago, I said, you pretty much have 30 more years of life left. So you've got a lot more delivery to do. So I guess you could just wait around to die, or you could do something. And that's all it took for her to remember who she was, who's a great leader. She's just got incredible business background. So with failure and reinvention, so I steal from Tony Robbins. Tony said you should always take a failure as just an outcome that you didn't intend or an outcome you didn't expect.
Sure.
So if I go to do some body squats on the bar and all that, and I put 350 pounds on, I'm going to smash onto the floor. And probably some part of my spine isn't going to be happy. Now, eventually, I should be able to lift 300, 400. Technically, I should be able to lift 500 pounds on my back. But I'm going to need a lot of education along the way. And you do get that through failure. But the way you do better in those moments is you fail in ways that are going to educate you and not crush you. And I think that people mistake which kind of failures exist in the world. They think that every failure is a crushing failure. I fail all the time. 99 out of 100 things I do fail, but because one of them succeeded, I live to keep working and to make it work better. And I'm so much more ahead of the person who's not taken one shot yet because they're so afraid of the failure. If I take 100 shots at you and you take one at me, I'm going to win. No question. And if you take 0 at me, I already won.
And what's interesting is a lot of what you're doing is it's public. It's out there. It's on the platforms, and people are watching everything you do. And it takes a certain type of mindset for an individual, frankly, to have the balls to do that publicly and not be afraid to test out new ideas, test out new approaches when it comes to business. I learn more from my unexpected results, and I'm not going to use the word failure, than I do from my wins in court. And I enjoy it. It's like being a sponge and just soaking it in, having a certain mindset. 10 years from now, it's not going to matter either way, right? So you just kind of absorb it and use it as a teaching moment. I'm not going to take up too much of more of your time today, Chris, but I did want to touch upon something I noticed you venturing into over the last year or so, maybe longer, and that has to do with physical fitness. It has to do with I think every day you're working out, you're eating healthy and things like that. How has that changed your life, and how important is it in business to take care of your body, to take care, be aware of your nutritional needs, etc.?
When I started a company named Owner, I decided it's going to be pretty dumb if I can't even own the distance between my fork and my mouth. And so that's really one of the big impetus points that made me decide to do it. The other is, I will be 45 this year, and I would like the next 60 years to have a really functional body to let me get around. And we've been sort of bred into being sit still, don't move humans, which of course causes a lot of atrophy. And when we travel for business, we are usually traveling from one steak dinner to the next with lots of liquor involved and all that, and it's pretty easy to allow your body's systems to just get really deteriorated and to grab something in the airport, et cetera, et cetera. The Minibar is not a food group, it turns out. So
It's not?
No, I know. I decided, well, I mean, depends where you stay. Some people have great mini bars. But
Right.
I've decided that what I needed to do is really just kind of own my choices in all ways, including my fitness and my health. What I've come to learn from it is that I've learned a lot of business lessons from it. I've learned all kinds of life lessons from it. I've learned that discipline is basically the repetition of commitment, and commitment is loving yourself enough to actually honor what you said you intend to do. And so to me, it's love of yourself, commitment to that love, and discipline, then form the molecules to make the creature known as success. Because I think that once we do our best efforts to build ourselves in all ways, then we're fighting entropy. I mean, there's really only two ways our body goes. We're either progressing or we're slipping back. There is no level ground in our bodies, in our health, in our life, anything. There's never level ground. So you're either going forward or you're slipping back. So that's what I'm working on.
Don't you and Jacqueline have a new book out about business and fitness?
Yes, so I wrote a book and had Jacqueline help me. It is called Just Start Here. I say many times in this book, I have no purpose or reason to write a book like this. I'm not a health professional. Jacqueline is. I have no credentials. I don't even. All I can tell you is it worked, and here's how I lost 60 pounds, and here's how I'm going to lose the next 40, and here's everything I did, and etc. And I'm very proud of the book because of the responses I've received. A lot of people have said, "Wow, I didn't know what to expect. I came away blown away." Some of my favorite interviews about the book, this guy Ben Greenfield, who runs this fitness site. Ben's like a science fitness guy. He's one of those guys that like blows into machines to know his carbon dioxide output and stuff like that. He was like, I was pleasantly surprised that the book was good, and I like to brag about that just because I'm an idiot and I wrote a book that this science guy liked. So that to me is like, the stamp. But it was fun, and what also I love the most about it is that there's a lot of people out there who have anywhere from 30 to 100 or more pounds to lose or gain who said, wow, this really felt like something I could take some action on, and so I did. And that's what mattered the most to me.
Well, I think it's a really important path to take. I've noticed over the years, Chris, that I'm a little bit older than you are, but the successful businessmen and businesswomen, both in just business or in law, in court, they usually have some type of athletic background from what I've seen. And I think, once again, it has to do with the mindset. They're not afraid to put in the work, the energy, the effort, and they have this drive, this goal. And it's not always the case. But more times than not, especially with trial lawyers, I've seen that to be the case. Someone was a high school athlete or college athlete, and they've taken that drive and discipline into their passion of law or their passion of business, and I think it's made a difference. It's easier said than done, especially as you get older. Trust me on that. But it's baby steps. You just got to get out there. And when I talk to you about my beach runs, you know what? 80% of it's a run, 20% of it's a walk. But I'm still out there trying to get the heart pumping, right? Hey, listen, this has been awesome, Chris. If people would like to connect with you and check out your downloadable products, your new webinar series, your new webinar classes, and things like that, what's the best way for them to go about doing so?
For me, it's pretty easy. Just go to chrisbrogan.com to look at the webinars. It's ownermag.com/webinars, and that's reasonably easy. So, Mitch, I appreciate it. I had a really great talk, and I love the questions. It's great to see it just brought to life in this great show.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all your support over the years, and I'm looking forward to many, many more. And you know what? Maybe someday when you're here in Orange County, we can connect at the local gym and throw some weights around, drink some protein drinks, and talk a little bit about the human side to doing business. How's that sound?
Sounds perfect to me. I would want nothing more.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Chris Brogan was my guest today at chrisbrogan.com. I'm Mitch Jackson. This is Human.Social, and you've just watched another episode of the Human Side Interviews. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.